Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to a video on vertical angles and linear pairs. Woo, so exciting. If you have any questions on the homework from the night before, you can remind me the next time that we see each other and we can go over them. It was a pretty short one and you had a lot of time in class, so I feel like you maybe won't have a ton of questions, maybe just the challenge one, which I think I drew a little bit on the board for. Anyway, so what we're going to do to start off actually is I do actually want us to do this GeoGebra one for realsies. All right, so I'll kind of lead you through it, but it would be nice if you actually played around with it a little bit because I think you're going to get a lot out of this one because this is kind of we have to recognize a visual thing for today's lesson. So like when we see something, we want to be able to recognize it visually that that's what it is. All right, so when we jump over to the GeoGebra, so it's in our notes, GeoGebra links right here, and the vertical angles and linear pairs, so the third one that's in there, you should get something like this. And I've given you guided instructions this time around, all right? So I want you to answer these questions. So we're going to check each of the boxes labeled 1 and 2 under vertical angles. Okay, so we're going to select boxes 1 and 2, and we're going to kind of go back and forth and look at them. And we're going to say, where are vertical angles located? What do you observe about the angle measures of these vertical angles? So these are vertical angles right here. And see, there are both 52.7 degrees for this particular one. And these ones are right here, and they are 127.3. So when we're trying to think about what these things look like, all right, we kind of started off with two segments that are in a crisscross from each other, all right? And I'm going to label things like 1, 2, 3, and 4 here to kind of help us see what's going on. And what I noticed in this one is that the vertical angles are the ones that are kind of opposite each other in this X shape that we have going on here, and that they have an equal measure, okay, which means that they're congruent. So if I'm kind of using this little label up here with the 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm noticing that angle 1, its measure is equal to the measure of angle 3, and that the measure of angle 2 is equal to the measure of angle 4. And that vertical angles, so I'm just going to write vertical angles, are, I'm going to say opposite each other, because I think that's like a pretty good way of talking about it, opposite each other. So basically, whenever we get this like crisscross pattern here, okay, where we get an X shape, the opposite angles are going to be congruent to each other. So those two that are in blue and these two that would be in green. So we can use that property to help us answer a whole bunch of fun questions, basically, because if we see this shape, we automatically know that the opposite angles are congruent to each other. All right, if we go to the next one, it wants us to start playing around with the checkboxes labeled 3, 4, 5, and 6 under something called a linear pair. And it says, what do we observe about the measures of each pair of angles that form a linear pair? Okay, so I'm going to check over here. So it's showing these two right here, and oh, look at that, they add up to 180. If I check 5, those are these two down here, and they also add up to 180. If I check 4, it's these two on the side. They add up to 180. And this one right here, they add up to 180. So linear pairs are going to be a pair of angles, and pair means 2, in case you don't know that. A pair of angles, so here I have an angle, we'll just say like 1 and 2, and they form a line. And we know that a line is a straight angle, and that straight angles have a measure of 180 degrees. So linear pairs are always going to add to 180 degrees, which means that they're supplementary to each other always. So they're adjacent and supplementary. So I think that's super fun, but we can basically use this to help us solve problems. And it still comes from the same crisscross. It's just that now what we're going to do is a little bit harder for me to color code, but we would say like this angle plus this angle are going to add to 180. And then like these two angles that would be in these two places, they would add to 180. And these two would add to 180, and then these two here would add to 180. So basically, in this little crisscross X shape, angles that are next to each other or adjacent to each other are always going to add to 180 degrees. And that's because they form a line, and a line is a straight angle, and we know that straight angles have a measure of 180 degrees. So last thing says, click and drag the blue points to change the angle measures. Do the relationships change for any of these things? So if I click and drag this, what do we notice is that the linear pairs still are adding up to 180, and that should make sense because we still have a line, which is still a straight angle. When we do vertical angles, same idea. They're opposite each other always, and they have an equal measure no matter what. So it doesn't change even if we play around with stuff. So do the angles change? No. Last but not least, we got this thing here, complete. I don't think I gave us enough like space there on the line, so my bad, but it says if two angles are vertical angles, right? So remember, vertical angles are going to be the angles that are opposite to each other. So that's here and here. Those are vertical to each other. And then these two are vertical to each other. So that's vertical angles, in case you need a little reminder already. And we know that the two angles are always congruent. Okay, so we're going to say then they are congruent, and we know that that means the measures are equal. If two things form a linear pair, so that's going to be something like this, that means that they are going to combine together to add up to 180, and that's because they make a straight angle with each other, right? So we would say then their measures add to 180 degrees. And that's again because they form a straight angle. All right. So here is that formally defined for us. So we have a linear pair is going to be adjacent angles. So remember, adjacent angles are angles that share a common vertex. They share a common side, and they don't overlap each other. And they are always going to form a supplementary angle or straight angle. Basically, they add to 180. When we have vertical angles, they are always going to form two sets of opposite angles being congruent. So for this one, that would be angle 3 and 6 are congruent to each other, and angles 4 and 5 are congruent to each other. So we would do like one swipe and two swipes for them. All right. And up here, we're just really emphasizing that together, these things would add to 180 degrees. So let's jump into the example here. We want to identify all pairs of linear pairs and then all vertical angles. So let's start off with the linear pairs. So linear pairs, and then we'll do vertical angles. Fun little list there. All right, so linear pairs, anything that is going to be two angles that form a line. So what I see is right here, 1 and 4 together are going to form a line with each other. So I'm going to say angle 1 and angle 4. Then I think if we're looking at this, it looks like 4 and 5 are also two angles that are going to form a line with each other. All right, so we can also do angle 4 and angle 5. And I think that's the only ones that are going to give us 2. So one way we can basically do this is follow a line and highlight it. So I followed that line, and there were 2 angles there. If I had followed it up top, do you see how that wasn't 2 angles? That's multiple angles. So linear pairs have to be 2 angles. So 1, 2, and 3, that's 3 angles, so it doesn't work. I can then follow this line. So that one works. That's why we wrote it down. If I go this way along the line, that's 3 angles. And then this line doesn't extend through, so we can't use it because we need to have the line extend through the angles to form like the 2 sets of angles. Vertical angles, we're going to look for ones that are opposite each other. And so they kind of make this crisscross. So you basically find 2 lines and crisscross them like this. And then the corners, opposite corners, are going to be congruent to each other. So we're going to get that angle 1 and angle 5 are vertical to each other, which means that they have an equal measure. And then this one's a little bit harder for us to talk about, but if we were to combine 2 and 3 together, they would be vertical with 4 total. Okay, so I might say like angle 2 plus angle 3, and I don't mean that in a literal sense like adding together. I'm just saying like, so I don't write the word and again. So angle 2 and angle 3 and angle 4. That's going to be our other set of vertical angles with each other. So if we kind of view 2 and 3 as one angle, it's going to be vertical with 4. So let's actually do some math with this. It says that 2 angles form a linear pair. So as soon as it says that, we are instantly allowed to draw a line, like so, and then we basically can just draw a line any old way so that we create 2 angles that are next to each other that form a line. So just from that right there, 2 angles form a linear pair, I can draw this picture. And it actually doesn't matter how accurate this picture is drawn, because we're just going to let the math tell us everything else we need to know about it. So we read this next part. It says the measure of one angle is 5 times the measure of the other. So I'm going to let one of the angles just be x, and then the other one is going to be 5 times that. So I'm going to let that be 5x. Okay, so one angle is x, the other one is 5 times as much, 5x. And what I know about these, since they are a linear pair, that means that they are going to add up to 180 degrees because they form a straight angle. So doing that, I can get 6x equals 180, and then x equals 30 degrees. It's asking me to actually say what the 2 angles are. So one of them is going to be 30 degrees, and then I'm just going to do 5 times 30, and the other one, 150 is what that's going to be. So there we go. Those are the 2 angles. Together they add up to 180, and one of them is 5 times as big as the other. Fun, right? Ooh, your turn. All right, so what you should do here is you should pause the video and you should try the your turn yourself. So questions 4 and 5, and see if you can figure them out. That was me pausing to see if you were going to actually pause. Did you? No? Didn't? All right, well, let's go over it together then. Do any of the numbered angles form a linear pair? So that's the key word there, pair. So what I'm going to do is kind of follow each line. So if I do this line right here and I look above it, that would be angles 6, 1, and 2. So that's 3 angles that can't be a pair. Underneath it, we have 3, 4, and 5. Again, 3 angles that can't work. So next, I'll look at this one. So that's going to have 1, 2, and 3 above it. That's not going to be a pair. Down below, 4, 5, 6, not going to be a pair. And the last one would be this one. That's going to have 2, 3, 4 on this side. Again, not a pair of angles because it's 3 of them. And then 1, 6, 5, not a pair because it's 3 of them. So the key word there is linear pair, and we're going to say no, there aren't any, and that's because there's no pairs. So no pairs, key word, pairs, form a straight angle. And remember that that's what linear pairs do. They form a straight angle. Which angles are vertical? So this one is a lot. All right, so what I'm going to do is start off by highlighting 2 of the angles at a time, or 2 of the lines at a time, I mean. And that's going to help me figure out a whole bunch of these. So the first 2 that I see are going to be these ones right here. All right, so 6 and 3 are going to be vertical to each other, which means that they are equal in measure. If I highlight a different set of lines now, so I'll do this one and this one, what that's going to create is right here, 1 and 4 are now opposite each other. So we know that angles 1 and angles 4 are going to be vertical angles, which means that they are congruent to each other. And then last but not least, we have this one, and that is going to create angle 2, and I've already used that color, trying to color code for you, angle 2 and angle 5. So we have angle 2 and angle 5. And our goal here is that you don't actually have to highlight it, that you can just kind of look at these things right away. I'm going to erase all my things so I can redo it just to show you. You look at it right away and you say, hey, these 2 are opposite each other, so I can say that they're going to be congruent to each other. Maybe I should highlight. That would be a better color coding for you. I can just instantly see that these 2 are opposite each other. They form a line with each other. They form that X shape on the inside there. Then we have 3 and 6 form opposite angles with each other. And then lastly, we have 2 and 5 form opposite. So I'm hoping that you can visually see that, because that's like half the battle if you can do that. For number 5, it says, let's get a fun purple color. The measure of an angle is twice the measure of its complement. Okay, so complement means it adds up to 90 degrees. If an angle is twice the measure of its complement, one of them is going to be x, and the other one is going to be twice as much. And we know that they have to add together to equal 90. Okay, so an angle being twice as much as one of them, one's x, one's 2x. That's going to give us 3x equals 90, and then x equals 30. So if we want to figure out what the two angles are, one of them is just plain old x, and the other one is going to be 2 times x, so that's going to be 2 times 30, which is going to be 60. And there you go. We reached the end of it. So what you can do for the rest of class is work on the practice section. Okay, so you can see it's right there. And then you don't actually have any homework, so just do as much of the practice as you can get done during class time, and then no homework over the weekend. And when I see you next time, we'll be able to go over any questions you have from last night's homework, and whatever questions you have from this video and the practice that you're doing. And we're lucky that next class we get to do a lot of practice with this to make sure that you're feeling really comfortable with the difference between a linear pair and vertical angles, because sometimes people get them confused, and I want to give you lots of time to make sure that you don't get confused by them. All right. I hope that this worked for you and that you were able to follow along, and you could pause it as needed. And I will see you next class. Bye.